And every month, HR people from around the world would have a spreadsheet in
Yep.
Excel,
Yep.
and they would put their employee names and numbers in it, and it would go into The Hague, and some poor person would take 600 spreadsheets
Yep.
and try to merge them all together to give the CEO the number of people that worked at Shell.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. There's a massive difference between the physical ability to change and intellectual capacity to change. Despite being counterintuitive, the intellectual capacity to change is much harder, as that requires exploring ideas you might not be comfortable with. That also requires exploring journeys you have never explored. And when you are undertaking such change initiatives at a massive scale, where several power centers with authority might be involved, it might be nearly impossible to change. But if you followed the process of storyboarding, where each step is carefully crafted and invested the right amount of time and investment, then the process might seem seamless. In today's episode, our guest, Brent Kedzierski, discusses the importance of storyboarding for digital transformation initiatives. He also discusses several stories of large global implementation where he was able to build consensus for global rollouts and explore operational and financial synergies at the Fortune 500 scale. Finally, he discusses several concepts related to change management, such as sense of urgency, case for change, estimating the capacity to change, and actionable steps. Let me introduce Brent to you. Brent Kedzierski is a sought-after keynote speaker and a leader of connected worker ecosystems at Hexagon, an international data company working in many industries, from oil and gas to AI and manufacturing. His work at Hexagon involves digitizing and connecting data autonomously and holistically so that futuristic work environments, which are fast approaching, will be human-centered. He wants to give people the necessary time, resources, tools, and skills to do their job. Brent was involved in human performance trends in significant government and commercial industries, including the Department of Defense, executive and judicial branches of the US government, aviation, healthcare, and nuclear industries. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hello, hey Brent. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Sam, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. And super excited to have you. I think the depth of the stories that you are going to have, the kind of experience that you bring to the table, obviously, of these global transformation projects, that is going to be fascinating for our listeners. Now, Brent, if my listeners may not know you, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us what you are focusing on these days, Brent?
Sure. Name's Brent Kedzierski. I've been in the workforce 30 plus years, 25 of those spent at Shell, doing global transformations in the human resource sector. Did a lot of their biggest HR strategic transformations and lots of strategies. And I've really gotten into, based on that, is the human experience at work, the kind of the human condition, what's going on with the workforce today. We've got so many issues around the Great Resignation, quiet Mondays, all the things that the experience at work isn't matching people's expectations. So I really dig into a lot of research with those kinds of things.
Okay, very good. So I'm definitely going to peel, a little bit into that. Would love to learn your experience. It's always fascinating to learn from that. Before we do that, we have one of these standard questions that we ask every single guest, and that
Okay.
is going to be your perspective on business growth.
So here's the thing. There's this thing called law of acceleration, right?
Yeah,
And it means the faster that technology grows, it's like a snowball. It gets bigger and
yeah,
bigger and goes down the hill faster and faster. Now, that also leads us to these things called technology traps,
yeah,
where we start to get over reliant on things. Like, for example, if you look at fossil fuels
yeah,
today, a lot of people think we're over reliant on fossil fuels because we use them for everything and we didn't kind of come up with alternative recommendations. So I believe in this thing called exponential business growth.
hmm,
And so in exponential business growth, I mean, you keep doubling and doubling and doubling,
yeah,
kind of like compound interest. And this is why we have these things today about this rate of change, and
yeah,
people can't adapt to the rate of change. And I talk a lot about industry 4
yeah,
and more so even industry 5.
yeah,
And with the technology of humans and accelerated automation,
yeah,
there's going to be a dimension of industry 5 where it's all about business resiliency.
yeah,
How fast can people forecast
yeah,
and adapt to dynamic change? And companies are going to really have to build capacity around this,
yeah,
in terms of their physical ability to change, but more so their intellectual ability to change.
yep,
And that's been the big thing that I've noticed in all my years is,
yeah,
oftentimes people, the easy part is the physical stuff. Do
yeah,
we have the time, the money, the resources, the
yeah,
people? Yeah.
yeah.
But the intellectual capacity to change is not there often. So that's one of my big plays that I always try to get people on. If you're not ready intellectually, just stop and save your money.
Yeah, so I'm definitely going to peel layers on the other things. But before we do that, we definitely want to dig a little bit more into how you describe this whole issue of intellectual, what is the term that you're using?
Intellectual capacity to change. Yeah.
Intellectual capacity to change. So, number one, how do you describe that? I don't know if you're going to have any sort of stories that you might be able to share where you had to make the change, or people were somehow struggling to change, and you sort of figure out some sort of strategy to be
Yeah.
able to change. Yeah,
Yeah,
go
so
ahead.
there's a couple of things, and I love to use stories.
Yeah,
A lot of the success I had in Shell is because I had a very simple model, and it was, do you have a sense of urgency to
yeah,
do something?
right.
And once you have that sense of urgency, you've got a burning platform.
Yeah,
Do you have a case for change? Can you actually make the case to change?
yeah,
And then do you have the actual capacity to change? So
right.
the intellectual and the physical.
Yeah,
Um, and then do you have, actionable first steps? And if you miss any one of those, the whole thing collapses. So if you don't have, actionable first steps, you'll
yeah,
kind of never get started and you'll lose your way.
right,
If you don't have a sense of urgency, people will
right.
fall off the tree and it'll
Yeah,
become a bare tree and fall. So I always use that kind of mental model around the capacity to change. And
yeah,
if you don't have any one of those things, just stop, because your predictability of failure just goes up. I mean, we already know with digital transformation,
yeah.
they don't meet their expectations, they fail, they don't deliver the results they were intended,
Yeah.
and the failure rate's up to 70-85%.
Yeah. Yeah. So very interesting. So, I mean, when you talk about these at the buzzwords level, right? People sort of understand that they have to do this, but when it comes to real execution, okay, they really, really struggle. So let's say, I mean, all these things are great, right? For example, sense of urgency, right? My executives typically, I mean, the kind of engagements that we are doing, they are going to say, no, 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 it's very urgent. Let's do it. They get into a project 4 months. After that, we are talking about budget, the sense of urgency is gone.
Right.
So these are some of the scenarios where people sort of have the implied expectations, what they are trying to do, but when they get into the real world, they really struggle. So I don't know, let me see if you can break it down a little bit in terms of how they can be successful, let's say, in defining sense of urgency. Okay, how to sort of streamline that. I think what people really struggle is the specifics, right? They cannot really have that inner drive, I guess. And I don't know how to put it in words, how to articulate that, right? Because you need to know what you are doing, whether that is really urgent or not. And if you don't have that drive, it's not going to go very far. After 4 months, you are going to lose interest. And that's probably the reality of most projects, I guess. I don't know if you share the same experience or not, Brent.
Oh yeah, I mean, again, I've done so many of
Yeah,
these,
yeah,
and it's almost a repetitive pattern because all human beings are the same.
yeah,
The bad news is they're fallible. They're all going to make mistakes. The good news is they're all adaptable. They can change if they want to. They're social. They want to have a mirror pointed to them to see social proofing that they're not crazy,
yeah,
and they're also they need to have some kind of meaning. But when I would do all these transformations,
yeah,
I and I don't know if you ever go to a movie. The movie has an arc. It has like Shakespeare's got the protagonist and the antagonist, and then they're rising action, and they
yeah,
build to a climax, and
yeah,
then they solve things. It would happen at Shell.
yeah,
So every time I would go into a project, and when I would tell your audience,
yeah,
when you go into any kind of effort from a point A, current position,
yeah,
to a point B, desired future state,
yeah,
you're always going to have that arc of drama.
right.
So you're going to have the protagonists, the
Yeah,
people, that want to have a success. Then you're going to have the antagonists, the people
yeah,
to say, we can't do it. We've done it before and it's failed. We're unique. You
yeah,
won't work here. All the typical,
right.
naysayers, because everybody has a little bit of a perspective in their background and their bias.
Yes.
And then you run into all this trouble. Like we would do stuff on the cloud. Well,
Yeah,
the vendor might not tell us that the cloud's going to cost money to launch it. It wasn't
yeah,
just about buying the product.
yeah,
Or they say, well, you didn't turn on, business warehouse. So, you don't get that, you don't get those fancy slides and graphics and all the nice, analytics you thought you were going to get that we showed you in the sales pitch.
yeah,
And then you're going to have all this climax where, you're finally saying, we're over budget and, somebody's head's going to roll and, all this stuff. And then you sort it out and then everybody, gets through the rough time. And then there's a big champion, we did it.
yeah,
So, I mean, you've got to go in everything. Say it's going to come. You're going to get setbacks. You're going to have naysayers. You're going
yeah,
to have all of those things. It's natural in transformation and you can't avoid it. So why not embrace it? And one of the things I did at Show all the time,
yeah,
I would take my biggest naysayers
yeah,
and I would get close to them because they were the ones that were giving me the insights on, what people were saying at the water cooler behind my back,
yeah. That is where you get the real insights, I guess, right? And I'm going to continue on your analogy for movie. I love that. Okay. And I'll give you some examples from my experience, what I see, to be completely honest, in our engagements. So everybody loves movies. Movies are great, right? Everybody wants the best movie possible. Okay. And they want it in $10, right? They don't really
Right,
appreciate the efforts that actually go in making those movies. Okay.
right,
So ERP implementation is like making a movie. Okay.
right,
It's
right.
pure
And
chaos.
but the thing is, the best movies have the best scripts, the best writers, the best component part. It's
Right?
the design, it's the storyboarding of the movie. And that's the same thing with, implementation of ERP. It's the storyboarding of those because we know that, we've got lots of trends in terms of, the 13 kind of, well, I always say there's 13 kinds of ERPs from
Yeah.
supply chain management to HR to all those things. And all the trends today are kind of impacting all those in different ways.
Yeah, so let's talk about storyboarding. Storyboarding, I love it, right? And I don't know whether people can really translate the storyboarding, from the perspective of ERP, right? So in the world of ERP, their position is going to be, hey, I probably have $100,000, and I am looking for the best AI to predict my inventory forecasting to be 99.9%. Delivery should be sent automatically. That's their expectation in general, what they are trying to get to, right? Their budget expectations are going to be really low as well. They are not going to have realistic expectations in terms of the skill set that they need to develop. Okay, they need to learn the concepts, and these are fundamentals. They take a long time to be able to master. So now that storyboarding, number one is going to be skills of the actors. How do you train those actors? Because actors is going to be the people that are inside the company to be able to do that, right? So maybe break it down a little bit overall from this transformation perspective. Okay, what is storyboarding? How to prepare for that? How do you sort of invest time and take it to the whole journey, I guess, to have realistic expectations.
Right. So I think it's interesting. I listened to one of your earlier podcasts and kind of get preparation to talk with you. And one of the gentlemen was talking, you were really getting a deep discussion around capability of ERP.
Yeah.
And I wrote down a couple of things that he had said and said, once you do the edits on the order, what do you do with the order?
Yeah.
And another thing he said, well, once you get into more complex scenarios, what do you do?
Yeah.
And then the third thing he said that caught my eye was, when you face those, omnidirectional choices and transactions, what do you do?
Yeah.
Well, I took it all. Those are all human things in the design of the ERP.
Yeah.
And, we put these ERPs in, and yes, they're going to save you money. Yes, they're going to rationalize your IT portfolio. Yes, they're going to, enable you to have better, faster decision making and better data and all those things. But on the human side, humans have this thing called the human experience cycle. Yeah. And even people that are going to go in and say, I want to invest in an ERP. Well, they're going to have expectations.
Yeah.
Then they're going to go into that ERP and they're going to have experiences.
Yeah.
And those experiences are driven by what I call the anatomy of work. So once you're getting your ERP, you've got to have a good flow and a good experience to engage and to become intimate with it.
Yeah.
I remember at Shell when we were doing, our ERP of SAP and things.
Yeah.
We were producing 1 million data quality errors a day or a week. I can't remember the time frame.
Yeah.
But, because when we would intake a new employee, they had 200 and some data elements. Well, what was going on is because the ERP wasn't really well designed, when the HR people were logging in information, if they didn't have that person's XYZ data, the screen wouldn't let them go to the next step unless they put something in the field. So they would go tick, 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 and it'd be like XXX, YYY, ZZZ.
Yeah.
Well, we found all these fields in there that we were just creating human errors because of the design of the ERP and the workflow.
Yeah.
So, so they have the expectations and they have the experience of working with this ERP or whatever process it's doing of the 13 things, the HR, the supply chain. And then they have this in-moment adaptation of the experience. So because of the way it's designed, they're going to make a choice.
Yep.
And that ERP, the way it's designed, the way it's architected, the way it's storyboarded is going to force that person to make a choice. And it's going to either be a good choice or a bad choice.
Yep.
And then once they get out of that ERP, they form these things called reflections. Okay. And that's the water cooler talk again. That's where they I remember at Shell, we would call the people that love SAP would call it SAP. The people that hated it would call it SAP. And it was just a cultural thing that formed. So you could always tell if somebody hated SAP or loved SAP the way they referred to it by name. But after you have this reflection, you form your opinion. So your perception, your memory, your beliefs, and your behaviors around that ERP, that system, and then you prepare for the next time. So you plan, you prepare, you anticipate. And either you're going to avoid it, or you're going to try to do your own fix, or you're going to try to use your own system the next time, and things like that. So I've got lots of stories about in Shell how little systems would form because people weren't happy with the way the ERP was doing, or when again, the reason Shell invested so much early on in the 2000s is they wanted to globalize, and the ERP is one of the greatest systems in the world to help you globalize, right? Because you're going to globalize your data, you're going to globalize, Shell had so many IT systems. I could tell you what Shell paid the legal and procurement people just to manage the contracts annually with all the systems they had. So when you rationalize that, and we had an IT portfolio of hundreds and up to probably thousands of systems, and these ERPs allow you to rationalize those. But you also have winners and losers, because when you globalize with big ERPs, some people are going to lose functionality because they have these little bespoke programs that do really specific things for them. Like they might have a requirement for compliance reporting, and this little bespoke system did well. You get the benefits of, global capability where 80% of your workforce has better, more advanced capability, but, 20% might lose their bespoke capability. And so that was the thing, too, of always trying to get people to manage their expectations about what they were winning and what they were losing.
Okay, so very interesting. And I mean, we can probably take so many different roads there in digging into all of those topics. But the one that I want to pick on is going to be globalization a little bit more. Okay, so companies don't necessarily understand, honestly speaking, what global synergy means. Okay, a lot of companies, they are going to feel that ERP is going to be this some sort of system that they are implementing. Even the bigger companies, they struggle to, number one, globalize their data, really explore the operational synergies, the financial synergies that you are going to get from this globalization. So, how do you start that process? So,
Right.
let's say if you were, I don't know, let's assume that you are probably Shell CEO right now and you are taking the journey of globalization. Maybe Shell does not need that, but maybe a mid-market company that is trying to be a Shell right now and you are helping them. So what will be that storyboarding, step one, step two,
Right.
step five, step
So,
10?
and I'll give you the exact storyboard that I used
Yeah,
because when
yeah,
I was first recruited into Shell, my first job was to globalize their learning function.
yeah,
At the same time, we were starting to introduce, SAP and all
yeah,
those kinds of
yeah,
things. Um, and the first thing was you have to have your base foundation, which is your global platform.
yep,
So you start by saying, we're going to rationalize and we're going to determine all, because I had to go and ask everybody that was, whether it was Shell Chemicals or
yeah,
Shell Upstream or, whatever it was, what are your requirements?
yeah,
And the first thing is to define the business requirements so the IT people can go define the IT functionalities.
yeah, yeah,
And that time oftentimes never worked well. And that's when Shell actually formed an IT project management framework because what was happening is, there was always scope creep because the
yep,
business people would start to see a solution, and the clearer and more advanced the solution got, they'd want more things because they understood it better.
yep,
So so IT might have a $1 million budget to deliver, but as the business people kept seeing the evolution of the software, whatever it was, they said, "Oh, well, why can't we do this and why can't we do that?"
yeah,
And let's
yeah,
and the scope would go, and the project would end up being 2 million.
yeah.
So they wanted some discipline, so they had to have an IT framework to
Okay.
manage this. So once you get that done, and you have a warehouse of business requirements, you can start to do this. And then once you get the IT platform down,
Yeah.
then you have to start getting your data model and things down.
Okay.
Because what would happen is, because of a global, some countries didn't have certain benefits, or they
Yeah.
didn't have religious issues, or all these kind of things that drove differences, right?
Yep.
Uniqueness within country perspectives. And so we did a country by country rollout, and you learn and learn and learn. I think when Exxon implemented their ERP, they did like a big bang. They
Yeah.
just did it globally all at once.
Must
You
be a
know,
massive
um,
disaster.
yeah, yeah. So now that you've done this, you get your data,
Yeah.
and you try to harmonize that. But
Yeah.
again, everybody's going to want to call data different names and
Yeah.
things. You build your data model, but then what you have to do is you try to do your global processes.
Yeah.
So we would do these big global process maps, okay? And because every country did everything differently, they
Yeah.
process things differently.
Yeah.
So now you have your platform and your data. Now you build your processes,
Yeah.
and then you build your procedures and things.
Yeah.
But then you have to do your org structure, and we kind
Yeah.
of save the org structures for last because when you're trying to rationalize,
Yeah.
you might have three VPs of finance or IT or supply chain. Well, now you're going to have one because
Yeah.
you've got a global process. So you're rationalizing everything. But in the ERP space,
Yeah.
we always use this methodology called ESSA.
Yeah.
Because as you globalize, you have to start to eliminate things, right?
Yeah.
Then you have to simplify things.
Yeah.
And once you eliminate and simplify, you can standardize. Because if you don't simplify and eliminate and you standardize, you eliminate garbage, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
Exactly.
waste.
Yeah.
And then once you standardize, you can kind of automate.
Yeah.
Well, again, if you don't eliminate, simplify, standardize, you're going to automate again more garbage. So,
Yeah.
that was the whole methodology in like ERP analysis of what did we want to keep in-house versus outsource. And that was the last thing. What do you outsource?
Yeah.
Like administrative activities, the things that weren't
Yeah.
core to your business.
Yeah.
So, you always have that kind of strategy to globalize. And again, it works. It works because you have to have your organization goals,
Yeah.
your organization processes, and then your jobs and the job goals. But all that has to also align with how do you manage your goals,
Yeah.
right? and then how do you basically design your goal? So this is what I talk about, the storyboarding. I work with companies today
Yeah.
and basically storyboard their enterprise capability.
Yeah.
And, at the end of it, it's almost like having you curate their capability and you render it and you give it characteristics.
Yeah.
So you might say this capability is difficult to deliver, or maybe it's risky or critical to the organization, or it's like maybe frequently or infrequently performed. So based on all that, you kind of have a portfolio, because the ERP system is only as good as how you design it and how your processes integrate with it. And again, that's why I personally think this upfront designing of the ERP and how it's going to work is much more important than, the capability of it, again.
Yeah, and you are talking my language at this point of time, to be completely honest. I mean, that's the song that I sing on a daily basis to our customers. They still don't get it. And one of the things that they don't get it, Brent, is this whole organizational change, to be completely honest. Okay. So I'll give you a story from my perspective, and then you can probably provide some more examples, I guess, from your perspective. So here, as you correctly pointed out, that all of these things are really interrelated. And one of the most foundational piece that you need to change is going to be your organization, because the way your organizational boundaries are going to be structured, that is going to define the state of your system. So in this particular case, this was a small company, and they were like, okay, we are a small, we always share responsibilities. And one of the areas where they were sharing the responsibilities was between their production and field services. Okay. So they had just one guy engineer doing both of these activities. And what they could not do is because, organizationally, it would be much harder change than what they wanted is, hey, give me a system that can do what I am doing right now. And then we are trying to coach them that, okay, if you want to do that, number one, it's going to be really hard to find that system. Number two, even if you find something, then you still have to customize, because most of the companies are not going to have processes this way. So if you made this minor change, it's going to be really easy from the system implementation perspective. It's going to make far more sense from the business perspective, but people still don't get that organizational change is still critical. So I don't know if you have any comment there based on this story, if you have seen similar situations, how you have overcome, I guess, that'll be really helpful.
Yeah. Well, what you said made me think of something that I've been wrestling with. So in my 20 plus years in Shell, we spent the first quarter of the century trying to globalize, which kind of meant standardize and rationalize, go against one platform, one best way of working. And what I found, and you tell me if you're seeing that in your discussions and views, now because of cyber physical connectivity. So, I can take an ERP and I can marry it with all kinds of other systems. I feel like businesses are saying there's a big hope in that we can now let everybody have customization, personalization, because the data exchange will enable. I'm seeing a lot of companies now, instead of trying to standardize, they're trying to get in their big ERPs and things and just make it flexible and dynamic and give everything to everybody that they want. I mean, what are you seeing with that?
Honestly speaking, the fundamentals are still same. Okay. So when you look at the easier data model, the flexible data model, the flexible systems that can do everything, typically those systems are really weak in the foundation. And that foundation, and I'm shocked that a business person is describing that. You are describing that the data model is foundation of everything. Okay. Typically, they are going to have really weak, data foundation. And based on that data foundation, you are going to get those stories, the one that you were describing, SAP versus SAP. That's what you are going to get inside the organization, because everybody is going to find their way, because typically data layer controls everything. Okay. So when you are going to have really loose and light system, you are going to get a lot more chatter. You are going to get a lot more conversations. You are going to get massive technical backlog and operational inefficiency. The ideal way of doing this is the way you are describing. Standardize your data, standardize your processes. That's where your business is supposed to live. It's not supposed to be these fancy flexible systems, flowery systems that you have to. Sure, flexibility is great, but again, the foundations have not changed in last 20 years. They are still the same.
Yeah, and I think that upfront blueprinting you talk about with
Exactly.
the human element is a lot of problems we always have is because we don't engineer what we want the system to help us achieve.
Yep.
Okay, whether you're talking about warehouse management, supply chain management, accounting,
Yep.
sales, CRM, we don't go and say what are the goals we're trying to deliver against, and let's design against that. Same thing with all these things about taking an ERP out of the box or customizing it. You have to say, well, the answer really is which is going to do what you need it to do.
Exactly.
I mean, if you take it out of the box and you say we're not going to customize, but it doesn't deliver for you, well, that's the wrong answer, right?
Exactly.
And I think that the other thing that we always try to do is like if you look at the ERP
Yeah.
trends today, how are they going to help your business with current problems? I work with a lot of clients today that have attrition issues, engagement issues, and tenure issues. Well, ERPs now are moving to this cloud-based.
Yeah.
Well, take advantage of that to support remote work.
Yeah.
You just can use your ERP now to help you address one of your biggest business challenges.
Yeah.
Again, this two-tier approach where it's allowing to have your ERP kind of come from local levels and global levels. That helps you with again the customization and all that stuff. So there's all these trends that are going on, and I always try to use those. Say, how do I have the foresight to leverage that in my design? Because I think a lot of people don't look at trends when they're designing because they're looking backwards instead of forwards.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that I try to do with this whole globalization of bringing the best of what an ERP can do to what you need it to do. And again, we still have this siloed mentality where your general principles aren't threading the red thread through all the elements of the ERP. They're not sharing best practices. They're not looking, in a matrix way.
Yeah.
So you get everybody that kind of wants to do it the way they want to do it, but they're not building more sustainable growth. And again, that goes back to that accelerative change. We don't do linear change anymore. It's all exponential change. And I think people live in this, status quo is no longer really on the table.
It is
I mean, anybody that's maintaining status quo is, there's not many industries that do it anymore.
Yeah, I could not agree more. So one of the things that you bring to the table, which is very unique, to be completely honest, and I definitely want to take your perspective on that. Okay. So, and in this episode or the podcast, I mean, we have not had a lot of HR folks. Okay.
Yeah.
And in our experience, to be completely honest, whenever we invite any of the HR folks in any ERP implementation, that's not very common. I'm going to be completely honest here. Okay. So typically, if you look at the global transformation, you are going to have your finance operations, sales, you are going to have probably logistics, procurement, all of these guys are going to fight with each other. And then you are going to ask, okay, where is HR? You might find that in not-for-profit public sector, maybe energy, utility, but, it's rare for HR to take the main role, in ERP implementation, at least in the mid-market space. So in your experience, and I want to dig a little bit overall into this whole organizational structure from the HR fundamentals perspective. I don't know what HR says, how do you build the organization? Should you be building more of the global organization, standardized? So tell us the whole HR perspective, how to do that and what role HR should play in any of the transformation.
Right. So again, we always use the model. I think you mentioned it as one of the pillars of your podcast: people, process, technology.
Right.
Same triangle we use.
Yeah.
If you put good people and bad processes and bad technology, it doesn't work. If you put bad people and good technology, it doesn't work. All those kind of things have to harmonize. So if you think about this Industry 4, and again, ERPs are a big part of Industry 4.
Yep.
The first level of maturity is connectivity.
Yep.
And connectivity lays the foundation for digital integration. Okay, so now I can connect this part of an ERP with this system or that system. And then that allows you to have the next level of maturity. People have data integration.
Yep.
So now instead of seeing a process or just one siloed process, I can see operations.
Yep.
right?
I agree.
So that's the second type. So then once you get those two things knitted down globally,
Yeah.
right, your people, process, technology perspective, you can then have optimization because that is driving decision making and you're enhancing, reducing kind of waste, and you're so once you optimize your process, what did we talk about? You can have advanced automation. Right.
Yeah.
So now you can have the AI,
Yeah.
predictive maintenance. You can do all these things that you're building capability. So
Yeah.
the HR model is always about building, human capability
Yeah.
through the environment of work, which is the tools, data, information, and then the power of the individual to be collaborative, creative, and cognitive in their thinking. But then now, once we got this advanced automation, we get to what everybody said. If you're automating everything and it's advanced, then you get to this thing to have all the machine learning.
Yeah.
Well, you now have the smart factory because the factory can fix itself. And that's what you want to get to the ERP stuff, where you're moving to this thing where the ERP is a self-continual loop where it's kind of that circular economy. I think about ERPs as kind of enabling circular economy because it has all this stuff. And if you think about the ERP, we used to be able to get descriptive analytics. It would describe what happened in the past, right? Now you can start to get diagnostic because it can dig in and diagnose because now you've got multiple pieces of data that it can make sense out of. But the two levels of analytics that we're trying to get to in ERPs and all these systems that would enable this connected workforce, this connected workplace, is predictive. So what is going to happen? But the highest level in an HR mindset is prescriptive. To say, what should I do? And when we get ERP systems and working with all other systems to help us predict and prescribe what we should be doing to self-optimize, that's when the power of AI and machine learning and all this stuff is really going to come into play. And that's what you've got to think, and your audience has to think, what's that the next level of the ERP going to do? And that's when you're building all this whole chat GBTs out of these things. And, you're going to have your ERPs actually walking around the factory, the warehouse.
Yeah, could not agree more. Great example, by the way. I love it. So time flies, Brent, when I'm talking to you. So I think the only thing we can take right now is any sort of closing advice for our listeners. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I think that, everything's an evolution. And I'll give you the thing. If I think back not too many years ago in Shell, probably 15, 16 years ago, we could not tell you how many expats we had in Shell. We couldn't tell you basic HR data globally. We couldn't even tell you how many people worked at Shell. Okay. And before we implemented SAP, we used to have this thing called Global Business Warehouse. And every month, HR people from around the world would have a spreadsheet in Excel, and they would put their employee names and numbers in it, and it would go into The Hague, and some poor person would take 600 spreadsheets and try to merge them all together to give the CEO the number of people that worked at Shell. That was less than 2 decades ago. Now you look where we're at now. So again, nothing easy is ever good. Nothing good is ever easy. This stuff's hard work. And I look at things today. I mean, I had to be really tenacious at Shell to move things forward. And it's hard work.
It is
anything
hard work.
With transformation and anything, I always say, technology can be complex. But people can be complicated.
I know.
And if you really understand the difference in those two words, you kind of sum up, business transformation in that word. So you've got, the complexities and you've got the complications. And that's kind of what I would say to people. You're never going to get away from that. And as the world spins and it's going to continue to spin, it's going to spin a bit faster, and so people just have to buckle up.
Yeah, could not agree more. And my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be, do not underestimate the efforts involved in any transformation implementation. It's always going to be more than what you would expect. So make sure you have planned for that. On that note, Brent, I really want to thank you for your time. This was a powerful episode.
Thank you, Sam. Good to talk.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you would like to learn more about Brent, head over to hexagon.com. It's hexagon.com. To explore more on the future of work, links and more information will also be available in the show notes. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.